Next up, truth or hype? Demonizing cortisol. So everywhere I look today, there's hype on the net, all right? And I'm a trendy guy. I like to stay up on the trends. I like to know what's going on with the hype. Makes me feel cool. But lately I've been hearing about cortisol being demonized, and people are mad about it. I see pitchforks heading all the way up to Transylvania, and they will not rest until they find cortisol and make it flee from its home, which of course is our bodies. Is this anti-cortisol rage valid, or is this just a hype train gone off the rails? I'm going off the rails on a crazy hype train about cortisol. But first, what else can I remember being demonized in the past? Well, we have fats that have been demonized, which we all know is kind of nuts. Al, did you see what I did there? Nuts. The fat content of nuts have fat in them. You got it, huh? We have the sun that's been demonized, and we know how important vitamin D is today. We also know how important light exposure is for our circadian rhythm, which helps us wake up and sleep at the right times. And in our last segment, we talked about the demonization of both protein and fiber, which is also kind of crazy, because we're seeing and have seen more and more research that supports their place in a healthy diet. So demonizing these things is nothing new, especially when people have something to sell you. But why cortisol? Who in the shadow government did cortisol cross? Was it the reptilians? Well, first, what is cortisol in the first place? Well, cortisol is a steroid hormone. It's not an anabolic steroid hormone before you ask, like manufactured forms of testosterone that help you build muscle. Cortisol is actually a catabolic steroid that your adrenals release that help you regulate stress. It's been called your body's alarm system. It controls mood, it controls fear, some major stressors that can motivate you to fight or flight. Now, one of the reasons cortisol is feared today is it makes the body release glucose into the blood. It works with the body's DNA to release energy. Glucose into the blood. Well, if you checked out our last Manjaro segment last week, or even our apple cider vinegar segment, the controversial one, we're all about controlling blood glucose to lose fat, or at least not gain fat, right? Well, yeah, stable blood glucose is generally a good thing. However, there's a difference. There's a huge difference between a hormone making blood sugar or energy readily available when we need it versus prolonged high blood glucose because we're eating candy all day, or we're stressed, or even because our insulin response is impaired, like in some people with type 2 diabetes. It's also good to keep in mind the only thing that's going to make you fat is eating more calories than you're burning. You're not going to be in a caloric deficit with more cortisol for some reason and be getting fatter. That would be a thermodynamic mystery. I can just see cortisol getting unmasked by Scooby and Shaggy. I was gonna make everyone in caloric deficits fat anyway, and I would have gotten away with it too if it wasn't for you meddling kids. That's cortisol. That's my cortisol impression. So because of a lack of understanding as to how cortisol works, I'm also hearing people say, I cringe as I say this, I'm hearing people say avoid intense workouts in intensity and duration because they increase cortisol. Well, there's a lot of problems with that, but there's three major problems that I can think of. The first problem is the increase in cortisol is a short-term response. It's what's called acute. When cortisol spikes due to exercise, cold water, or even stress, they're acute spikes. There's a stressor, they rise, the stressor exits, hopefully, the cortisol should fall, just like your heart rate increasing during exercise, your blood pressure increasing. In the short term, these things increase, but in the long term, they get better. Hey, even the stress of lifting a heavy weight, think about it. It's uncomfortable when you're doing it, and you might not even feel very strong when you're lifting heavy weights to failure. But if all goes well and you lift weights consistently with adequate nutrition and rest, you do get stronger. And as time goes on, it becomes easier to lift the weights. So that's the first problem. The second problem with avoiding the intense exercise is exercise sessions that are more intense in nature, more stressful, of course are going to release more cortisol because it's a stress marker, right? We need healthy amounts of stress in our life to feel, well, alive. That's why people like scary movies and roller coasters. My wife doesn't like scary movies. I have to watch them alone. Did you see The Babadook? It's much scarier alone. It's like if you did a crazy leg workout and your legs were sore the day after. It may be a marker you did a good job, and now your body needed to repair that damaged muscle and rebuild that muscle to be stronger in the future for the next workout, right? You let your body repair in between. You're not sore anymore, and now you train again. You certainly wouldn't demonize muscle soreness after an intense workout, would you? I don't know. Maybe you would, but I certainly wouldn't. The third problem with avoiding this vigorous exercise is all of the science supporting vigorous exercise without overtraining, of course, and leaving room for recovery, such as, and I quote, it's going to be a long list, reduced risk of heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, high blood pressure, dementia and Alzheimer, cancers, and also a risk of some pregnancy complications, better sleep, improvements in cognition, less weight gain, that's a good one, lower obesity rates, and less chance of related health conditions, better bone health, improved balance, fewer symptoms of depression and anxiety, and an overall better quality of life and an overall sense of well-being. Whew, that's a lot of good stuff. I wonder if the anti-vigorous exercise people like read those studies. So it might not be the most responsible to throw the vigorous exercise out with the bathwater just yet, as we will not see progress in exercise without that cortisol spike. Now, there is one thing I'll say about cortisol, not in defending people vilifying it, because they shouldn't vilify it. It's not evil. We don't have this evil hormone in us, but just factually, there may be times we do want less cortisol circulating through us. In layman's terms, again, cortisol is a stress hormone. It tells our body we need energy. But we don't always want to be stressed, of course not. What we want are acute spikes of cortisol that go up and down quickly, like after exercise or a stressful event. We don't want prolonged, slightly elevated levels of cortisol. And one of many, many reasons is elevated cortisol levels can definitely interfere with sleep. We have upcoming episodes on sleep, so make sure you subscribe for them, check them out, because sleep is enormously important and not talked about enough, in my opinion. It's one of the reasons I consume carbohydrates at night, the evil carbohydrates, another thing vilified, is when we have carbohydrates in our body and we already have the blood sugar or energy available from them, it signals our body not to have cortisol release energy into our blood, which can interfere with sleep. It's like, hey, cortisol, we're cool here. Like, plenty of energy from all these carbs. You can chill. I need to go to sleep. So if you're having trouble sleeping, and you're not afraid of the evil carbs, you should not be. Unless you have celiacs, then you should be afraid of some carbs, but certainly not all of them. You may want to try carbohydrates at night. And of course, I would recommend complex, slow-burning carbohydrates that are also loaded with fiber, not 3 boxes of Mike and Ike's, and now you really can't sleep. I can only imagine, this guy Charlie said I could have all the movie theater candy I wanted, I'd sleep better, and I'm up all night. Cortisol is a good thing in normal spikes and dips. We don't want prolonged levels. If anything, we want higher levels in the morning, spikes and drops during and throughout the day, and lower levels at night. Carbohydrates at night can help with the latter for sure. Also, I would 100% say, comfortably, you don't want to be avoiding exercise either in intensity or duration due to cortisol fear. It's one thing if you have a condition and your doctor's telling you to avoid intense exercise. You hear me say it a lot. You always listen to your doctor. But this, frankly, is an overblown fear perpetuated by people who perhaps don't understand the role of cortisol in our bodies, or are maybe even looking to sell you the new anti-cortisol workout diet routine. It's also frightening that people are coming up with reasons for obesity and overall disease today, like people are getting too much exercise. I mean, that's Fruit Loops. That's nuts. Like, don't get me wrong, overtraining is a real thing. Don't run a marathon every day, I guess, but it's also a very rare thing. I certainly wouldn't be blaming the obesity epidemic on too much exercise. I mean, these experts need to look at what people are eating, if they actually are moving enough, and their sleep quality, in my humble opinion, to name a few. I think that would be a much more helpful conclusion. So, verdict's in. This one's all aboard the hype train, guys. Choo choo! Let me know in the comments, what do you think about cortisol? And what do you think about people demonizing and vilifying intense exercise? I think it's bonkers.